You used to be the one I could tell everything to, the one whose voice made the noise in my head quiet, the one who made me feel like I mattered in a world that always felt too loud, too fast, too much. You didn't have to try, you just were. And somehow I made you my anchor. I loved quietly. I loved in the way that doesn't announce itself to the world. I listened when you needed to talk, stayed up when you couldn't sleep, checked in without asking. I gave pieces of myself without thinking twice. And every time I did, I believed it mattered to you. I thought maybe you saw me, really saw me. At first you did. You smiled at the little things I noticed. You laughed at my dumb jokes. You asked how my day went without it feeling like an obligation. And I let myself hope. I imagined a life with you, quiet moments, small routines, shared laughs. I let my heart lean into you because you leaned back. I believed in the reciprocity, in the quiet consistency. But slowly it shifted. First it was a day without a text. Then 2. Then your voice started sounding distant, even when you were in the room. Replies got shorter. Your attention wandered. I noticed immediately because my heart had grown so used to you being there. And instead of stepping back, I doubled down. I texted again. I explained myself. I tried to shrink into the space I thought I should occupy, so I wouldn't be too much. I gave more because you had already started giving less. And that's when it hit me. The pattern. I'd been here before, in different forms, with people who didn't stay, people who didn't choose me the way I chose them. And yet, I kept offering the same loyalty, the same care, because the feeling of being chosen, even if temporary, felt too precious to let go. I began to wonder if maybe I was the problem. If my quiet love, the kind that doesn't demand attention, doesn't shout, doesn't fill rooms, was somehow not enough for someone like you. You thrived in light and energy in people, while I needed silence to recharge. Loving loudly wasn't my way. And maybe that's why I didn't stop loving you even when I should have. Because even when I knew you were pulling away, my heart clung to the idea that you'd come back, that you'd notice, that you'd see what you were leaving behind. But you never did. Eventually I stopped reaching out. I stopped explaining. I stopped holding pieces of myself for you to take. And in that silence I realized something I didn't want to admit. The love I gave wasn't enough to make you stay. And the quiet, steady, intentional love that was my everything was invisible to you. You didn't see it. You didn't feel it the way I felt it. I won't lie, the hurt is still there. It lives in the little things. The way your name pops up in my head. The songs you used to play, the laughs we shared, the quiet routines I built around you that now feel like empty echoes. And yet I don't hate you. I just understand. I understand the kind of people you are, and the kind of people I am. I understand that loving someone quietly doesn't make it less real, and being chosen by someone doesn't always mean they'll see your worth. The hardest part is learning to let go of someone who never fully stayed, while still keeping yourself open to love. I gave you my all, and now I have to give the rest to me. I have to protect the parts of myself that hurt the most, that still hope, that still care. Loving deeply doesn't guarantee being loved back, but it guarantees knowing your own heart. And that's where I start. After you left, the world didn't change. The sun still rose, the streets still buzzed, and people still laughed around me. But my chest felt hollow in ways that no one could see. I kept moving, kept showing up, kept pretending that the quiet ache inside me wasn't there. Because the truth is, no one notices quiet heartbreak. They only notice the anger, the yelling, the dramatic exits, not the way your heart keeps loving in silence even when it's broken. I realized I had spent so long giving my energy to someone else that I forgot what it felt like to give it to myself. I'd been the person everyone leaned on, the one who listened, who understood, who stayed calm when chaos hit. But I had no one to listen to me, no one to understand that I was quietly unraveling. I carried my pain like an invisible weight, hoping it wouldn't show. And I learned something important. Caring deeply doesn't always mean being rewarded. Being consistent, being kind, being loyal. It doesn't guarantee you'll be chosen even when your heart screams that it should. Some people just can't see the kind of love you offer, and some people leave not because your love wasn't enough, but because they weren't ready for it, or they never knew how to handle it. I stopped pretending that the quiet ache would disappear overnight. I let myself feel it. I let myself stare at my phone and resist the urge to text you, to explain, to plead for acknowledgement that would never come. I let myself replay our moments, the ones I thought were sacred, and mourn them properly, Not with anger, not with revenge, not with performance, but with honest grief. It was in that quiet morning that I started to understand something else. My love, my loyalty, my calm presence. It wasn't broken. It wasn't flawed. It was real, even if the world didn't recognize it. Loving quietly doesn't mean loving less. It means loving in a way that doesn't need applause, that doesn't need validation, that doesn't need to be returned in the same way to be meaningful. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I started to reclaim my energy. I learned to sit with myself without the constant craving for someone else's attention. I started noticing my own heartbeat, my own thoughts, my own small victories. I let my love for myself, once dormant, grow quietly alongside the shadow of what I lost. The heartbreak didn't vanish. It lingered soft and persistent, a reminder of how much I was capable of feeling. But I realized I could survive it. I could move through it. I could carry it without letting it define me. Because sometimes the strongest love isn't the love you get back. It's the love you refuse to let break you, even when it leaves empty-handed. And that was the first lesson in truly choosing myself. After months of carrying the quiet ache, I started noticing the little things about myself again. The things I had neglected while my heart was tied to someone who didn't stay. I noticed how my mind would wander into the spaces I used to fill with them. And I realized I had a choice. I could let it haunt me, or I could let it teach me. Being the kind of person who loves quietly, who gives without expecting, who cares deeply. It left me bruised, yes, but it also left me capable. Capable of understanding my own worth, capable of feeling without apology, capable of holding space for someone else without losing myself. I started small, a quiet walk at night, just me and the streetlights, listening to music that made me feel even if it hurt, reading, writing, thinking. I remembered that I didn't need constant stimulation, loud voices, or validation to exist fully. My calm, my steadiness, my thoughtfulness, they weren't flaws. They were my armor, my way of navigating a world that often misunderstood soft hearts. And then, slowly, I started noticing people again. Not anyone specific, not in that desperate, clutching way I used to, but in a curious, open way. People who spoke gently, who listened without asking for proof of loyalty. People whose presence felt safe, not consuming. And I realized that the fear of being hurt again didn't have to dictate every interaction. It could guide me instead, teach me to see who truly deserves my time, my care, my energy. The hardest part wasn't learning to trust others, it was learning to trust myself. To know that if someone leaves, it doesn't mean I'm broken. To know that if someone doesn't choose me, it doesn't erase the love I gave, or the love I'm capable of giving in the future. To know that being quietly devoted isn't a weakness. It's a strength that only the right person will recognize. I started imagining love differently. Not the all-consuming, overwhelming kind that leaves you hollow when it disappears, but the kind that grows steadily, quietly, intentionally. The kind that doesn't need to fill rooms or draw attention to itself. The kind that respects the space you need, the calm you crave, the heart that refuses to perform just to be seen. And in that realization, I began to heal. Not fully, not yet, but enough to know that my past heartbreak didn't define me. That my loyalty, my care, my patience, they weren't liabilities. They were the very things that would one day make someone feel home. The very things that would make someone grateful for the depth of what I offer. I didn't know if I'd ever stop being cautious, stop noticing the patterns, stop fearing the quiet pull of attachment. But I knew that I could exist fully, love fully, and protect my heart fully, even if the world didn't always recognize it. And that, I think, is where the real strength lives. In the quiet endurance of a heart that loves deeply, even after it's been broken. Eventually the quiet ache softened, not vanished. Heartbreak doesn't just disappear but softened, like a wound that stops bleeding and starts to scar. I learned that I could care deeply without losing myself, that my loyalty didn't have to be a trap, and that my quiet love wasn't something to apologize for. I began to notice the difference between people who merely take and those who choose to give back. I could see the patterns clearly now, the ones I used to fall for, the ones who faded when I leaned in. And instead of chasing them, I stepped back. I let them walk their path and stopped questioning my worth when they didn't stay. I discovered that being the introvert, the quietly devoted, the one who loves without noise, those weren't flaws. They were the lens through which I could see the right people, The ones who wouldn't mistake my calm for boredom or my need for space for distance. I realized that the kind of love I give isn't flashy, but it is enduring. It is steady. It is rare. And it deserves to be seen by someone capable of holding it with care. And then in a moment I didn't plan for, someone appeared, not the echo of the past, not a mirror of what I thought I wanted, but someone who recognized the quiet strength I carry. They didn't demand, they didn't rush, they didn't force me to perform. They simply saw me. And that recognition, that simple choice to see me as I am, felt like home in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I realized finally that heartbreak isn't just pain, it's preparation. It's training your heart to recognize what is real, what is worth giving to, what is worth waiting for. Every tear, every lonely night, every moment I thought I wasn't enough. They were teaching me how to love wisely, how to protect myself without closing off, how to stay open without losing my dignity. I still care deeply, I always will, but now I care wisely. I offer my heart fully but not recklessly. I choose people who see it, who honor it, who don't make me shrink to fit their world. And in that, I've found something stronger than love itself, respect for myself, even in the shadow of the love I've lost. Because the truth I finally understand is this: a heart that has loved quietly, fiercely, and deeply is not broken. It is alive. And one day, that heart will be met by someone who knows its value, someone who chooses it, someone who doesn't need it explained. And until that day comes, I carry myself with the knowledge that my love is rare, my loyalty is precious, and my quiet strength is enough. You used to be my best friend, the person I would choose over everyone else. What changed? I've asked myself that question more times than I'll ever admit, not out loud, just in the quiet moments, when something reminds me of you without permission, when I hear a joke you would have laughed at, when I instinctively reach for my phone before remembering there's no point anymore. You used to be the first person I told everything to, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because somehow your opinion mattered more than anyone else's. Your voice carried weight, your presence carried peace, and I didn't even realize how rare that was while I had it. I just thought you'd always be there. We didn't become close all at once. It happened slowly. One conversation that lasted longer than expected. One moment of honesty neither of us planned. One night where neither of us wanted to say goodbye first. And suddenly you weren't just someone I talked to. You were my person. The one I told things I didn't tell anyone else. The one who saw parts of me I kept hidden from the world. You knew when I wasn't okay without me saying it. You'd ask, talk to me, what's wrong? And I would. Because with you, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to be the strong version of myself. I could just exist. And that was enough for you. There's something dangerous about that kind of connection, because you don't prepare for it to end. You don't think about life without it. It becomes part of you, part of your routine, part of your identity. You stop imagining endings, because some part of you believes this is permanent, that this is different, that this is safe. I don't know when things started changing. That's the worst part. There wasn't a moment. There wasn't a fight. There wasn't a clear ending. Just distance. Quiet, gradual distance. Your replies got shorter. Your energy shifted. You stopped asking how I was. Stopped noticing the things you used to notice instantly. I remember staring at our messages, rereading them, wondering if I did something wrong. Wondering if there was a version of me you got tired of. Or if you just found someone who made you forget about me entirely. And I hated myself for even thinking that. Because I trusted you. I trusted us. And I tried to ignore it at first. Told myself you were busy, tired, going through something. I gave you space even when it hurt. Because I didn't want to be someone you felt obligated to respond to. I didn't want to be the person you sighed at before replying. So I became quieter, smaller, less present. Not because I cared less, but because I cared too much to push you away completely. And the craziest part is, even while you were slowly leaving, you still meant everything to me. I still chose you, even when it stopped feeling like you were choosing me. I still defended you in my head, still made excuses for your absence, still held on to the version of you that used to stay, because I didn't want to accept that maybe that version of you didn't exist anymore. The hardest thing I've ever had to accept is that you didn't leave all at once. You left in pieces, in delayed replies, in canceled plans, and conversations that felt forced instead of effortless. Until one day you weren't my best friend anymore. You were just someone I used to know everything about. And that's a different kind of pain. Because you're not grieving a person who disappeared. You're grieving a person who's still alive, just no longer yours. Sometimes I wonder if you ever think about me, if something ever reminds you of how close we were. If you ever miss me the way I miss you. Or if I became easy to forget, easy to replace, easy to move on from. Because I'll be honest, you weren't easy to lose, you weren't easy to replace. You weren't easy to forget. You were home, and losing you didn't just break my heart. It broke the part of me that believed some people stay forever. You used to be my best friend, and I still don't know what changed. I just know that one day, you stopped choosing me. And I never stopped choosing you. I think the part that hurt the most wasn't the day you left. It was all the days after. The days where something happened and you weren't the first person I told anymore. The days where I'd pick up my phone out of instinct, already knowing there wouldn't be a message from you. The days where I had to teach myself not to look for you in places you used to be. Because when someone becomes part of your everyday life, losing them doesn't feel like a single moment. It feels like 1,000 small losses, over and over again. I remember the exact feeling of realizing I couldn't come to you anymore. Not because I didn't want to, but because you weren't there in the same way. Your responses felt distant, polite, like you were talking to someone you used to know, not someone you once couldn't go a day without. And I tried to act like it didn't affect me, tried to match your energy, tried to pretend I didn't notice the difference. But I noticed everything. I noticed how you stopped asking questions, how conversations died faster, how I became the only one trying to keep them alive. And there's nothing more humiliating than feeling yourself become optional to someone who once made you feel essential. I started questioning everything. Was any of it real? Did you ever care the way I cared, or was I just there when it was convenient? When you were bored, when you needed someone to listen? Because when you stopped needing me, you stopped choosing me, and that realization changes you. It makes you quieter, more careful, more guarded. Not because you want to be, but because you don't ever want to feel that disposable again. There were nights I sat there staring at our old messages, reading conversations from a version of us that doesn't exist anymore. And I'd wonder how two people could go from talking every single day to nothing. No closure, no explanation, just silence. Like everything we were meant less than I thought it did. And silence is the worst answer of all, because it forces you to create your own conclusions, most of which hurt more than the truth probably would have. I never told you how much it broke me, how losing you didn't just hurt, it changed me. It changed how I trust people, how I open up, how I let people get close. Because you taught me that even the person who knows you best can still become a stranger, and that's a terrifying thing to learn. The truth is, I wasn't just losing you. I was losing the version of myself that existed when you were in my life. The version of me that felt understood, chosen, safe, and I've spent a long time trying to find him again. But some parts of you don't come back the same after someone you trusted walks away without warning. Some parts of you stay behind with them, and you just learn to live with what's left. The hardest part is you didn't disappear all at once. You faded slowly. So slowly I didn't even realize it was happening until you were already gone. At first it was small things. You stopped telling me about your day. Stopped sharing the random thoughts you used to trust me with. Stopped needing me the way you used to. And I told myself it was nothing. People get busy. People change. That's normal, right? But deep down, there was this quiet voice in my head that already knew the truth. I was losing you, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I tried to hold on. I tried to be easier to love, quieter, less emotional, less needy. I stopped bringing up things that bothered me. Stopped asking questions I was afraid of hearing the answers to. I made myself smaller, just so you'd have more space to stay. But the sad part is, you don't lose people because you took up too much space. You lose them because they were already leaving, and I was the only one pretending we were still the same. I remember the moment it really hit me. It wasn't during a fight. It wasn't during some dramatic ending. It was during a normal, ordinary moment. Something happened, and for the first time, you weren't the person I wanted to tell. Not because I didn't care about you, but because something inside me knew you didn't care the same anymore. And that realization didn't feel loud. It felt quiet, heavy, final, like watching the last light in the room turn off. You became someone I used to know, someone I had memories with but no future with. And that's a different kind of pain, because you're still alive, still out there, still existing in the same world as me, but I can't reach you anymore, not in the way that mattered. Sometimes I still think about you, not in the way I used to, not with hope, just with this strange sense of disbelief. Like I can't fully process how someone who meant everything became nothing. How we went from being inseparable to strangers with history. And the worst part is, I don't even think you realize what you did to me. Because for you, it was probably just moving on. But for me, it was losing the one person I never thought I'd have to live without. And the truth is, I blamed myself for a long time. I kept replaying everything in my head like there was some exact moment where I ruined it. Some sentence I shouldn't have said. Some version of me that wasn't enough. I convinced myself that if I had just been better, you would have stayed. If I was more confident, more interesting, less emotional, less me, maybe you wouldn't have left. But the hardest thing I've had to accept is this. You didn't leave because I was too much. You left because I wasn't enough for you. And those are two very different things. I think what hurts the most isn't that you're gone. It's that you stayed long enough to become part of me. You became my routine. My first thought when something good happened. My first instinct when something went wrong. You weren't just someone I loved. You were home. And when you left, you didn't just take yourself. You took the version of me that existed with you. The version that felt safe. The version that wasn't constantly afraid of being abandoned. People think heartbreak is loud, crying, begging, breaking down. But the real heartbreak is quiet. It's checking your phone and realizing there's nothing there. It's seeing something that reminds you of them and having no one to send it to. It's missing someone who's still alive. It's waking up and remembering over and over again that they chose a life without you in it. I don't hate you, and I don't think I ever will. Because even though you broke me, you also showed me how deeply I'm capable of loving. You showed me the parts of myself that were real, the parts that cared without conditions, the parts that stayed even when you didn't. And maybe one day, you'll just be a memory that doesn't hurt anymore. Maybe one day I'll hear your name and feel nothing. Maybe one day I'll stop wondering why I wasn't enough. But until then, there's a version of me that still exists in the past, still standing there, still believing you were the one person who wouldn't leave, still not understanding how my best friend became someone I had to learn how to live without. I learned how to disappear without going anywhere, not physically, mentally, emotionally, in conversations, in rooms, in relationships where I was still present, but no longer fully there. It didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, quietly, the way most damage does. At first I was loud, not with my voice, but with my care. I replied fast. I noticed everything. I remembered the small details you didn't even realize you revealed, the way your mood shifted and your punctuation, the difference between your I'm fine and your I'm fine. I cared in a way that had weight, not performative, not temporary, real. And you noticed that about me. At least in the beginning, you liked how available I was, how consistent, how safe. I became the person you went to when you needed comfort, when you needed distraction, when you needed to not feel alone. And I didn't question it, because being needed felt close enough to being loved. But slowly things changed. Not in ways you could point at, in ways you could only feel. Your replies got shorter, your presence got thinner. You were still there, technically, but you weren't with me anymore. And I felt it in the spaces between your words. I started rereading conversations, trying to find the exact moment things shifted, trying to locate the version of me you stopped choosing. I wondered if I became too much, or maybe not enough. I started editing myself in real time, holding back thoughts, holding back emotions, holding back the instinct to reach out. Not because I didn't feel those things anymore, but because I was afraid of confirming what I already suspected, that I was becoming someone you tolerated instead of someone you valued. And that realization does something to you. It makes you quiet, it makes you careful, it makes you feel like your presence is something you have to apologize for. So I adapted. I became easier, less emotional, less expressive, less me. I stopped bringing up things that hurt me, because every time I tried, it somehow turned into my fault. Every conversation became a courtroom. I would walk in holding a simple truth that hurt me, and leave questioning my right to feel anything at all. So I learned to carry it alone, to swallow reactions, to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. Because losing pieces of myself slowly felt safer than losing you all at once. But the strange thing about disappearing is, no one notices at first. They don't notice when you stop sharing your thoughts. They don't notice when you stop asking questions. They don't notice when you stop hoping, because they were never looking that closely to begin with. And eventually you stop recognizing yourself too. You become someone quieter, someone emptier, someone who exists more in their head than in their life. Not because you want to die, but because existing like this feels heavier than it should. You still function, you still laugh, you still show up, but there's a distance between you and everything else, like you're watching your own life instead of living it. And the hardest part isn't the loneliness, it's the realization that you became this way trying to keep someone who was never afraid of losing you. You gave everything without being asked, and they accepted it without ever promising to stay. And now you're left rebuilding a version of yourself that doesn't know how to exist without shrinking, learning how to take up space again, learning how to speak without apologizing, learning how to believe that your presence was never the problem. It was just given to the wrong person. And the truth is, I didn't disappear because I was weak. I disappeared because I cared too much for someone who didn't notice I was fading. The scariest part wasn't when you left. It was when I realized that I had already been leaving myself for months just to keep you comfortable. I remember the exact moment it hit me. Not during an argument, not during some dramatic ending, but during a normal conversation. You were talking and I was listening, nodding, responding, saying all the right things, and suddenly it felt like I was watching myself from outside my own body. Like none of it was real. Like I was just playing the role of someone who still cared the same way I used to. But something inside me was quieter than before. Not healed, not okay, just tired. Tired of being the one who noticed everything. Tired of being the one who stayed soft in situations that hardened me. Tired of pretending I didn't feel the distance growing between us every single day. You didn't do one big, obvious thing. It was the small things. The things no one else would notice. The way you stopped asking how I was. The way your voice lost its warmth. The way I started feeling like an interruption instead of a priority. And I hated myself for how much it affected me. Because I told myself I was stronger than that. That I didn't need constant reassurance. That I didn't need you to care the same way I did. But that was a lie. Not because I was weak, but because when you love someone fully, their absence doesn't feel neutral. It feels loud. It echoes. And the worst part? You weren't completely gone. You were still there just enough to keep me hoping. Just enough to keep me from walking away. You'd say something kind. You'd show up randomly. You'd remind me of the version of you that made me feel safe. And I would hold on to those moments like they meant everything. Like they erased all the silence in between. But they didn't. They just made it harder to accept the truth. That I was no longer loved the way I was still loving you. I started blaming myself. Maybe I became boring. Maybe I became predictable. Maybe I gave too much, too fast, too openly. Maybe if I had been colder, more distant, less available, you would have stayed. So I tried to change. I gave you space you never asked for. I held back words I wanted to say. I pretended I didn't care as much. But it didn't fix anything. Because you can't make someone value you by valuing yourself less. And that realization broke something in me. Not loudly, quietly. Like a light turning off in a room no one else was standing in. I stopped expecting your messages. Stopped hoping you'd notice the difference. Stopped believing I meant what I used to mean to you. And that's when I realized something that hurt more than losing you. You didn't leave suddenly. You left slowly, in pieces, in silence. in ways that made me question my own reality. Until one day I wasn't waiting for you anymore. Not because I didn't care, but because there was nothing left of me to wait with. I had given it all to someone who never realized they were holding it. And when they let go, they didn't even feel the weight of what they dropped. There was a point where I stopped recognizing who I was. Not physically, but internally. I was still waking up, still eating, still talking to people, still existing. But I wasn't there. Not really. Everything felt muted, like life had been turned down to a volume so low it barely existed. And the worst part was how normal it all looked from the outside. No one saw the nights I laid there staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation we ever had, trying to figure out exactly where I stopped being enough. I kept looking for the exact moment everything changed, like if I could find it, I could fix it, reverse it, undo it. But there wasn't one moment, just 1,000 small ones. 1,000 times I chose you over myself. 1,000 times I stayed quiet to avoid losing you. 1,000 times I convinced myself that surviving on half your love was better than living without it. It sounds pathetic when you say it out loud, but when you're in it, it doesn't feel pathetic. It feels like loyalty. It feels like fighting for something that mattered, even if you were the only one fighting. I remember one night specifically. It was late, too late for anyone to be awake, but I couldn't sleep. My chest felt heavy in a way I couldn't explain. Not sharp pain, not panic, just pressure. Like existing itself was exhausting. And for the first time, a thought crossed my mind that scared me. Not that I wanted to die, but that I didn't want to feel like this anymore. That I didn't want to wake up and carry the same emptiness into another day. I didn't want to explain it, didn't want to fix it, didn't want to survive it. I just wanted silence. Not forever. Just long enough to remember what it felt like to breathe without pain sitting in my lungs. And that thought stayed with me. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, persistent. It showed up in small moments and when something reminded me of you. When my phone stayed silent. When I realized how easy it was for you to live without me. It made me question everything, my worth, my value, my place in people's lives. Because when the person who meant everything to you can walk away without looking back, it makes you wonder if you ever mattered at all. And I hated myself for thinking that way. Because logically, I knew my value didn't come from you. But emotionally it felt like you took pieces of me when you left. Pieces I didn't know how to get back. I stopped talking about it. Stopped explaining it. Because no one really understands that kind of pain unless they've lived it. They tell you to move on, to distract yourself, to focus on other things. But they don't understand that you're not just losing a person. You're losing the version of yourself that existed with them. The version that felt safe. The version that believed in something lasting. And I missed that version of me more than I missed you. Because that version of me didn't question his worth. Didn't overanalyze silence. Didn't feel disposable. He loved freely, without fear, without hesitation, without knowing how much it would eventually cost him. And I didn't know if I'd ever be that person again. That was the part that scared me the most. Not losing you, but losing myself in the process. Because once you fall that far into emptiness, you start to forget what it feels like to climb out. I wish I could say I woke up one day and it stopped hurting. That there was some dramatic turning point, some breakthrough, some moment where everything suddenly made sense. But that's not how it happened. It ended quietly. Not the pain, but the version of me that kept waiting for you as it happened on a normal day. No music, no rain, no emotional breakdown. I just realized something. You weren't coming back. Not today. Not tomorrow, not ever. And for the first time, that truth didn't crush me. It just sat there, heavy, but honest. I spent so long believing that if I held on tight enough, stayed patient enough, stayed loyal enough, eventually you'd see my value. Eventually you'd remember what we had. Eventually you'd choose me again. But the truth is, you already made your choice, and it wasn't me. And that realization did something to me. It didn't destroy me, it freed me. Because I finally understood something I was too afraid to admit before. Love isn't supposed to feel like convincing someone to stay. It isn't supposed to feel like slowly disappearing just to make someone else comfortable. It isn't supposed to feel like you have to earn basic care. I thought losing you was the worst thing that could happen to me, but I was wrong. The worst thing was losing myself while trying to keep you. And once I saw that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. I started noticing how small I made myself, how I accepted half effort, half love, half presence, because I was scared of having nothing. But having half of someone isn't the same as having them. It's lonelier because they're there, but not really. And I deserved more than that. Not because I was perfect, not because I never made mistakes, but because I stayed. I cared, I tried. I loved you in a way that was real, and that has value, even if you couldn't see it, even if you didn't keep it. I won't lie and say I never think about you anymore. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I remember the version of us that existed before everything broke, and it still hurts a little, but it doesn't destroy me like it used to, because I don't need you to come back to feel whole anymore. I learned how to sit with myself, how to exist without needing someone else to validate my place in the world. And that was the hardest part, learning that I was enough. Even after you left, the truth is I didn't die when I lost you. It just felt like I did. But the version of me that survived, he's stronger, he's quieter, he's more careful with his heart. Not closed, just aware. And maybe one day I'll love someone again. Not the way I loved you. Not blindly, not desperately, but honestly. And when that happens, I won't beg them to stay, because the right person won't need convincing. They'll stay on their own, and this time, I won't lose myself trying to keep them. I didn't realize it at first. It wasn't obvious. It was quiet. It looked like small things, like being the one who listened longer than anyone else, being the one people came to when their world collapsed, being the one who stayed on the phone at 2:17 a.m. while they cried about someone who wouldn't stay for them the way I stayed for everyone. It felt like purpose. It felt like meaning. It felt like if I could just be enough for everyone else, maybe one day I'd be enough for someone too. And for a while I believed I was. She used to fall asleep on the phone with me, not because she had to, because she wanted to, or at least that's what I told myself. We talked about everything, the future and the past, the things that hurt her, the things that hurt me. She told me I was different. She told me I was safe. She told me she'd never had someone who understood her like I did. And I believed her. Not because I was naive. Because when someone looks at you like you matter, your brain doesn't question it. Your brain accepts it. Your heart builds a home inside it. I didn't mind giving her everything, my time, my attention, my patience. I didn't keep score. Because love isn't supposed to be a transaction. It's supposed to be a choice. And I chose her every day, even on the days she didn't choose me. At first it was small changes, longer replies, then shorter ones, then replies that felt like obligations instead of intentions. You can feel the difference. No one ever talks about that. But you can feel when someone stops loving you, not in one moment, in 1,000 small absences. She stopped asking how I was. Stopped noticing things, stopped being there the way I had always been there for her. But I stayed, because that's who I was. I stayed when things got quiet. I stayed when things got confusing. I stayed when things started hurting, because I thought love meant endurance. I thought love meant proving you weren't like everyone else who left. I didn't realize that sometimes staying too long is just another way of abandoning yourself. The night everything ended wasn't dramatic, no screaming, no chaos. Just distance, cold distance, the kind that feels permanent. She told me I was amazing. She told me I deserved someone better. She told me she just wasn't ready. And I remember sitting there, staring at the words, feeling something inside me collapse in complete silence. Because those words sound kind, but they don't feel kind when you're the one being left behind. They feel like being slowly erased. She didn't hate me. She didn't fight for me. She just stopped choosing me. And that was worse, because it made me question everything. Was I too easy to leave? Too available? Too understanding? Too patient? Was being a good person the reason I was so easy to lose? I watched her become distant, watched her become someone I didn't recognize, watched her give pieces of herself to someone who didn't give her half of what I gave her. And that was the part that broke something in me. Not losing her, but realizing everything I gave her didn't make me irreplaceable. It made me convenient, and convenience is temporary. I started becoming quieter after that, not because I had nothing to say, but because I finally understood that not everyone deserves access to your heart. I stopped reaching out first, stopped explaining myself, stopped trying to convince people to stay, and something strange happened. No one chased me. No one fought for me. No one noticed right away. And that's when the truth hit me. I had never been chosen the way I chose others. I had been appreciated, needed, relied on, but not chosen. Not fully, not permanently. And that realization could have destroyed me. It almost did. There were nights I sat alone with my thoughts, replaying everything, wondering what I could have done differently, wondering why I wasn't enough, wondering why the people I gave everything to found it so easy to give me nothing in return. But eventually, something inside me changed. Not all at once. Slowly, quietly. I stopped blaming myself for the way people treated me. I stopped believing their inability to love me properly was a reflection of my worth. I stopped seeing my kindness as a flaw. Because the truth is, the world doesn't punish you for being weak. It punishes you for being rare. People don't know how to hold something that doesn't hurt them. They don't know how to trust something that doesn't play games. They don't know how to value something that doesn't threaten to leave. So they take it for granted until it's gone. I'm not the same person I was before. I still care. I still feel deeply. I still love fully. But I don't give myself away so easily anymore. I don't stay where I'm not valued. I don't fight for people who wouldn't fight for me. And most importantly, I don't see myself as someone who was left behind. I see myself as someone who finally stopped standing in places that were never meant for him. Because one day someone will meet me and they won't see my heart as something temporary. They want something worth keeping, something worth protecting. And when that day comes, I won't have to prove anything. They'll stay, not because I convinced them to, but because they'll never want to know what it feels like to lose someone like me. I didn't notice it at first. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and suddenly felt different. It was smaller than that, quieter. It showed up in the pauses between things, in the way I stopped checking my phone as much, not because I didn't care, but because I stopped expecting anything to be there. I stopped getting excited when someone new talked to me, stopped letting my mind run ahead and imagine who they could become in my life. I stayed present, detached, careful, because the last time I let myself feel too much, it didn't just hurt when it ended. It changed me. I became someone who thinks twice before saying how they feel. Someone who rewrites messages before sending them. Someone who notices shifts in tone immediately, even when nothing is said directly. I learned how to read distance before it was spoken. And the worst part is, I didn't learn it because I wanted to. I learned it because I had to. Because I know what it feels like to slowly lose someone who's still right there. I know what it feels like to watch effort fade in real time. To feel someone mentally leave before they physically do. So now part of me stays ready. Not paranoid. Not anxious. Just ready. Ready for the moment things change again. Ready for the moment I realize I cared more than they did. Ready for the moment history repeats itself. And I hate that. Because I wasn't always like this. I used to love without hesitation. Without calculation, without fear of what it might turn into. I didn't measure my words. I didn't hold parts of myself back. I gave people the full version of me without making them earn it first. And maybe that was my mistake. Not loving, but loving people who weren't ready to hold it. Now I notice how I keep certain thoughts to myself. How I don't open up the same way anymore. How I observe more than I express. People probably think I've become calmer, more mature, more emotionally controlled. But the truth is, I've just learned what happens when you give someone access to parts of you they don't know how to value. You start protecting those parts, not because you want to become cold, but because you remember what it felt like when they were mishandled. I didn't become heartless. I became aware. Aware that not everyone who comes into your life plans on staying. Aware that words don't always match intentions. Aware that people can mean everything to you and still leave like you meant nothing to them. And that awareness stays with you. It doesn't go away. It sits quietly in the background, watching, waiting, making sure you never forget what it took to rebuild yourself the first time. The strange thing is, no one ever sees this part of you happen. They only see the version that exists after. The calmer version, the quieter version, the version that doesn't react the way it used to. They think you've always been like this, Like you were born harder to reach, harder to read, harder to hurt. They don't see the old version of you, the one who used to smile at their phone without realizing it, the one who used to reread conversations because it made them feel close to someone, the one who didn't overthink every shift in energy. Back then, things felt simple. You felt chosen, and there's a certain peace in feeling chosen, a certain safety in knowing you don't have to question where you stand. But losing that changes something deeper than people realize, because it's not just about losing them. It's about losing the version of yourself that existed when they were there, the version of you that felt lighter, more open, more alive. And after that version disappears, you try to rebuild. You learn how to be alone again. You learn how to sit with yourself without reaching for someone else to fill the silence. You learn how to carry your own thoughts without needing someone to help you make sense of them. At first it feels unnatural, empty, like something is missing because something is. You get used to sharing your world with someone, got used to being understood without having to explain everything, got used to not being alone inside your own head, and when that's gone, the silence feels louder than it should. But eventually, you stop fighting it. You stop trying to replace what left. You stop trying to find pieces of them in other people. You just exist, day by day, moment by moment. You start realizing you survived something you thought would break you. You start realizing that you're still here, still breathing, still moving forward, even if it's slower than before. And one day, without noticing exactly when it happened, you stop missing them the same way. Not because they didn't matter, but because you finally remembered that you do too. You remember that your value was never tied to their ability to see it. You remember that your heart didn't lose its depth just because someone failed to understand it. You remember that you are still capable of feeling everything you felt before. You just don't give it to everyone anymore. And maybe that's not a loss. Maybe that's growth. There's a moment that doesn't feel dramatic. No music, no sudden realization, no clear line where everything changes. It's quiet. So quiet you almost miss it. You're just living your life. Not waiting, not checking, not hoping, just existing. And you realize they don't cross your mind the way they used to. Not first thing in the morning, not late at night when everything used to feel heavier. They've become a memory instead of a presence. And that's when it hits you. You didn't lose yourself. You survived yourself. You survived the overthinking, the nights where your chest felt tight for no clear reason, the conversations you replayed 100 different ways trying to find where it went wrong. You survived blaming yourself for things that were never yours to carry. You survived giving your heart to someone who didn't know what to do with it. And somehow, your heart is still here, still beating, still capable of feeling. That's the part no one tells you. You don't become cold. You don't become empty. You become selective. You stop forcing connections that don't feel natural. You stop trying to convince people to see your value. You stop shrinking yourself just to make someone else comfortable. Because you finally understand something that used to terrify you. The right people won't make you question your place in their life. They won't make you feel like you're too much and not enough at the same time. They won't make you feel replaceable. They stay. Not because you begged them to. Not because you proved your worth, but because they see it without needing to be convinced. And the most important part of all, you stayed too. Through every version of yourself. Through every doubt. Through every moment you thought you wouldn't be okay. You stayed. You didn't abandon yourself even when someone else did. And now you're not waiting for someone to choose you. You already did. And that changes everything. I know that most of you won't make it to the end of this video. I'm not asking you to. But I know that if you do, it might just change your life. Not because I have some secret. Not because I figured everything out. But because I learned something the hard way. Something I wish someone told me before I spent years giving parts of myself to people who were never planning to stay. It starts small. It always does. You meet someone and nothing feels forced. You don't rehearse what you're going to say. You don't question how long to wait before replying. You just exist, and somehow they meet you there. And for the first time in a long time, you feel calm. Not excited, not anxious, just calm. Like your nervous system can finally rest. They laugh at your dumb jokes. They notice things about you that nobody else ever pointed out. They make you feel seen in a way that's almost uncomfortable because you didn't realize how invisible you felt before them. And slowly, without even realizing it, they become part of your routine. They become the person you want to tell everything to. the first person you think of when something good happens, the only person you want when something goes wrong, and that's when it becomes dangerous, because you stop preparing for the possibility of losing them. You start believing they're permanent, you start believing they're different, you start trusting them with parts of yourself you spent years protecting, parts nobody else ever earned. You show them your insecurities, your fears, your past, the parts of you that aren't impressive or confident or put together, and they look at you like none of it makes you less, like none of it scares them away, like they're staying. But then something changes, not all at once, not in some dramatic explosion, just slowly, quietly. They stop replying as fast. The conversations get shorter. They stop asking questions they used to care about. You feel it immediately, but you don't say anything because you're afraid of sounding insecure. You're afraid of pushing them away faster. So you pretend you don't notice. You pretend you're okay with less attention, less effort, less of them. You convince yourself this is normal, that this is just what happens over time. But deep down, you know the truth. You know when someone is slowly leaving you, even if they haven't said it yet. And the worst part isn't the distance. It's the hope that maybe they'll come back. Maybe they're just busy. Maybe they're just going through something. Maybe if you're patient enough, understanding enough, low maintenance enough, they'll remember why they chose you in the first place. So you try harder. You become easier to love. You ask for less. You accept things that would have hurt you before. You stay quiet when something bothers you. You make yourself smaller so they don't feel overwhelmed by you, and you don't even realize you're disappearing. Until one day, you look at yourself, and you don't recognize who you became. Someone quieter, someone more anxious, someone who checks their phone more than they should, someone who feels relieved just to get a reply that used to be normal. And that's when it hits you. You weren't asking for too much, you were asking the wrong person, because the right person never makes you feel like loving them is a risk to your own stability. The right person doesn't slowly replace your peace with anxiety. They don't make you question your worth. They don't make you feel like you're lucky just to be tolerated. But when you lose someone like that, it changes you. Not in some dramatic, obvious way, but in quiet ways. You hesitate before opening up again. You overanalyze small changes in people's behavior. You protect yourself because you remember what it felt like to trust someone completely and watch them slowly become a stranger. But here's the part that actually changes your life. It wasn't a waste. It wasn't meaningless, because losing them forced you to meet yourself. The version of you that survived without them. The version of you that learned how to be alone. The version of you that realized your value was never dependent on someone else choosing you. And one day, you stop checking their name. You stop wondering what they're doing. You stop hoping they'll come back, not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself more. You realized that some people were never meant to stay forever. They were meant to show you how deeply you're capable of loving. They were meant to show you your own heart. And even though it broke, it proved something important. You were real, you were genuine, you were capable of loving fully. And one day someone will meet you at that same depth, not temporarily, not halfway, not conditionally, completely. And when that happens, you won't have to shrink yourself to keep them. Because the right person doesn't make you feel like you're hard to love. They make you feel like you were worth finding all along. But there's something nobody tells you after they leave. You don't just lose them. You lose the version of yourself that existed when they were there. And that's the part that takes the longest to grieve. Because it wasn't just about them. It was about who you were when you believed someone was choosing you. You were softer, more open. You laughed easier. You didn't overthink every small shift in tone or timing. You weren't afraid of silence. Because silence didn't mean abandonment back then. It just meant peace. But after they left, silence meant something else. It meant absence. It meant wondering. It meant staring at your phone longer than you should, even when you knew nothing was coming. And you start doing things you never used to do. Replaying old conversations in your head, trying to pinpoint the exact moment things started changing. The exact moment you became less important. You wonder if it was something you said, something you did, or maybe something you didn't do enough. You question yourself in ways that slowly erode your confidence, because it's easier to blame yourself than accept the truth, that sometimes people leave, not because you weren't enough, but because they weren't capable of staying, and that realization feels unfair, because you stayed, even when it hurt, even when you felt the distance growing, even when part of you knew the ending was already written. You stayed not because you were weak, but because you loved them in a way that didn't have an exit plan. You didn't love them halfway. You didn't prepare yourself for their absence. You trusted their presence. And that's what made it real. That's what made it dangerous. Because when someone becomes part of your emotional foundation, losing them doesn't just hurt your heart. It destabilizes your entire sense of safety. You stop trusting stability. You stop trusting permanence. You stop trusting words. Because you remember how convincing they sounded when they said they weren't going anywhere. And now you understand something you wish you didn't. People don't always leave suddenly. Sometimes they leave slowly. Sometimes they leave while they're still physically there. Sometimes the person you miss is someone who already stopped being yours long before they actually left. And the most painful part is how normal everything looks on the outside. The world keeps moving, people keep laughing, life keeps happening. But inside you, something is still trying to process the loss. Still trying to understand how someone could go from being your safest place to being someone you can't reach anymore. And that's when loneliness feels the heaviest. Not when you're physically alone, but when you realize how emotionally alone you've become. Because there's no closure, no clear explanation, just distance, just silence, just the quiet acceptance that the version of them you loved doesn't exist anymore. And eventually, you stop asking questions out loud, not because you found the answers, but because you got tired of hearing silence respond. You stop checking their profile, stop rereading old messages, stop hovering over their name like it still means something. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally understood something that took you too long to accept. You can't force someone to value you by staying available. You can't prove your worth to someone who already decided not to see it. And you can't keep holding on to someone who already let go of you. So you start doing something unfamiliar. You start sitting with yourself. At first it feels unbearable, because without them, there's nothing distracting you from your own thoughts. No notifications, no reassurance, no temporary relief from the emptiness they left behind. Just you and everything you've been avoiding. You realize how much of your identity was built around their presence, how much of your happiness depended on their attention, how much of your peace depended on their consistency. And without it, you feel exposed. Like you have to rebuild yourself from nothing. There are nights where it hits harder than usual, where everything reminds you of them. A song, a smell, a random memory that shows up without permission, and for a moment it feels like you're back there again. Like nothing changed. Like they never left. But then reality settles in, and you're reminded that they did. And that's when you face the hardest truth of all. They're not coming back to be the person you miss. Even if they came back physically, it wouldn't be the same. Because the version of them you loved existed in a moment that's already gone. And you can't recreate something that required two people when only one of them is still holding on. So slowly, you start choosing yourself. Not in some dramatic, life-changing moment, but in small, quiet ways. You stop blaming yourself for their inability to stay. You stop questioning whether you were enough. You stop shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's uncertainty. And for the first time in a long time, you start realizing something that changes everything. You didn't lose them. You lost someone who was capable of losing you, and that difference matters more than you think. And the strangest part is, life doesn't stop. Not when they leave. Not when your chest still feels heavy. Not when you're still carrying conversations that never got finished. The world keeps moving like nothing happened, and you're forced to move with it. Even when part of you is still standing in the exact moment everything fell apart. At first you think healing is supposed to feel obvious. Like one day you wake up and they don't cross your mind anymore. Like one day their name doesn't mean anything. Like one day you feel like the version of yourself you were before they changed you. But that's not how it happens. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It happens quietly, in moments you don't even notice at first. Like the first time you go an entire day without checking your phone hoping they texted. The first time you hear their name and it doesn't ruin your mood. The first time you laugh without feeling guilty for moving on. It's subtle, almost invisible, but it's real. And somewhere along the way, you stop missing them the same way. Not because they didn't matter, but because you finally understand that what you were holding on to wasn't them anymore. It was the version of them you created in your mind. the version that stayed, the version that chose you, the version that didn't leave. But reality is different. Reality is the choices people make when they have the opportunity to stay and they don't. And that realization hurts, but it also frees you because you stop waiting. You stop hoping for closure that isn't coming. You stop needing an explanation from someone who already gave you their answer through their absence. And instead, you start returning to yourself. You start remembering who you were before you started measuring your worth through someone else's attention. You start rebuilding the parts of you that you abandoned just to keep them comfortable. You start becoming whole again. Not because someone saved you, but because you finally saved yourself. And one day, without realizing when it happened, you'll look back at this version of you, the one who thought they couldn't survive losing them, the one who thought the pain would last forever, the one who thought they lost everything, and you'll realize something that once felt impossible. You didn't break, you didn't disappear, you didn't lose yourself, you were just becoming someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who finally understands that the right people won't make you question your place in their life. They won't make you feel temporary. They won't make you earn the kind of love that should have been given freely. And when that person finally comes into your life, you won't have to chase them. You won't have to convince them. You won't have to wonder, because they'll stay. Not because you begged them to, but because they never wanted to leave in the first place. And by then, you won't be the same person who was afraid of being alone. You'll be someone who knows their own value, someone who survived losing what they thought they needed, and discovered they were enough all along.